My name is Josef Gangl, and on May 5th, 1945, just 5 days after Hitler put a bullet in his own head, I did something that would have gotten me executed just days earlier. I stood shoulder to shoulder with American soldiers and fought against my own countrymen. Germans and Americans, firing from the same positions, defending the same walls, bleeding for the same cause. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were enemies. We'd been killing each other for years. But in a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps, with French VIPs trapped inside and SS death squads closing in, we had one choice: fight together or die separately. They say war makes strange bedfellows. They have no idea. This is the story of the most unlikely battle of World War II, a battle that history barely remembers, but that changed everything I thought I knew about honor, duty, and what it means to be a soldier. This is the story of Castle Itter. It was the first week of May 1945, and the world I had known was collapsing around me like a house of cards. I was a major in the Wehrmacht, the regular German army, not the SS, that's important. And I'd watched this war turn from what we thought was a noble cause into an absolute nightmare. By April 45, everyone with half a brain knew it was over. Hitler was dead. Berlin was rubble. The Reich we'd fought for was dissolving like salt in rain. But the dying wasn't over. That was the problem. I was stationed in the Tyrol region of Austria. Beautiful country, snow-capped peaks, green valleys, medieval castles perched on hillsides. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. The SS was still active, still fanatic, still executing anyone they considered a traitor. And in their eyes, anyone who wasn't willing to fight to the last bullet was a traitor. I'd already made my choice. I was done. Done with Hitler's madness, done with the SS's brutality, done with a war that had stopped making sense years ago. I'd been quietly helping the Austrian resistance, passing information, sabotaging when I could. It was dangerous. If the SS found out, they'd hang me from the nearest lamppost. But then I heard about Castle Itter. A local resistance fighter, a man named Alois Meyer, came to me with urgent information. There was a castle about 5 kilometers away, Schloss Itter, a medieval fortress that had been converted into a prison. But these weren't ordinary prisoners. These were French VIPs, former prime ministers, generals, politicians, even a famous tennis player. High-value prisoners that the Nazis had kept as bargaining chips. The problem: the SS knew the war was ending, and they had orders. Rather than let these prisoners be liberated, they were planning to execute them all, tie up loose ends, eliminate witnesses, murder them in cold blood just because they could. When? I asked Alois. Soon, he said. maybe days, maybe hours. I looked at the map. Castle Itter sat on a hilltop, isolated, surrounded by forest, defensible but not impregnable. If the SS came in force, those prisoners didn't stand a chance. "We need help," I said. "Real help." Alois nodded. "The Americans are close. Innsbruck fell yesterday. They might have a unit nearby. Americans. Our enemies. The men I'd been trained to kill. But what choice did we have? Let me tell you about Castle Itter. It wasn't some fairy tale castle with flags and banners. By 1945 it was a prison, a prominent Gefängnis, a camp for important prisoners. The French prisoners there were like a who's who of French politics and military. Edouard Daladier, who'd been Prime Minister of France before the war. Paul Reynaud, another former Prime Minister. General Maurice Gamelin, who'd commanded French forces in 1940. General Maxime Weygand, a legendary military mind. There was Marie-Agnès Caillot, Charles de Gaulle's own sister. François de la Roque, a political leader. And Jean Borotra, a tennis champion who'd won Wimbledon. Of all things. These people had been imprisoned for years, some since 1942. They'd watched France fall, watched their country suffer under occupation, all while locked in this alpine castle. The Nazis kept them alive as leverage, as potential bargaining chips. But now they were liabilities, witnesses to war crimes, evidence of Nazi atrocities. The SS wanted them dead. The castle's regular guards had already fled. Smart men. They knew what was coming and they wanted no part of it. That left the prisoners essentially unguarded, free but trapped. Free inside a castle but surrounded by SS units who wanted them dead. On May 4th, one of the prisoners, Zvonimir Chuchkovich, a Yugoslav officer, actually escaped and made it to American lines. He told them about the situation. But would the Americans care enough to risk their lives for French prisoners? Would they get there in time? That's when I made my decision. I gathered 14 of my men. Soldiers I trusted, men who were sick of the SS's madness, and I told them the plan. "We're going to defend that castle," I said, "with or without the Americans." One of them, a young corporal named Wegscheider, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sir, that's treason. If the SAS finds out, the SS is going to find out regardless," I interrupted. "Because we're going to be shooting at them. So the question isn't whether we're committing treason. The question is, are we soldiers or are we murderers? Because if we let those prisoners die, we're accomplices to murder." The men looked at each other. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. We weren't fighting for Hitler anymore. We were fighting for something we'd almost forgotten. Basic human decency. On May 4th, we drove to Castle Itter in 2 vehicles. It felt surreal. German Wehrmacht soldiers openly deserting our posts, driving to defend prisoners from our own SS. When we arrived, the French prisoners were stunned. Here we were, German soldiers, telling them we were there to protect them. After years of imprisonment by Germans, suddenly Germans were their saviors. You could see the confusion and distrust in their eyes. General Weigand, an old military man, looked at me with those sharp, calculating eyes. "Why should we trust you, Major?" "Because if I wanted you dead, General, you'd already be dead," I replied. "The SS is coming. They have orders to execute all of you. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen." "You and 14 men?" Reynaud asked skeptically. "And hopefully the Americans," I said. "A Yugoslav officer made it through the lines. They know you're here. And if they don't come," I checked my rifle, "then we'll find out how long 15 German soldiers can hold a medieval castle against the SS. The prisoners, to their credit, didn't just sit idle. These were tough men, politicians and generals who'd survived years of imprisonment. They were ready to fight for their own freedom. We started preparing the castle defenses, positioning furniture as barricades, identifying firing positions. Then, on May 5th, we heard it. The distinctive rumble of tank treads on the mountain road. Everyone froze. SS or American? Friend or enemy? I grabbed my binoculars and looked down the road. There, climbing the switchbacks toward the castle, was an M4 Sherman tank. American. But here's where it got complicated. I was a German officer in Wehrmacht uniform. If I walked out to meet them, there was a very real chance they'd shoot me on sight. We were still technically at war. They had every right to. I took a white flag, a bedsheet actually, and walked out of the castle gate, hands raised, my heart pounding. The tank stopped about 50 meters away. The turret swung toward me. I could see the main gun pointing directly at my chest. One command, one trigger pull, and I'd be a memory. Then the hatch opened, and a man emerged. American captain, young, maybe 30 years old. Captain John C. Lee, Jack, to his men. He had a pistol drawn, aimed at me. "I'm Major Josef Gangl, Wehrmacht," I called out in my heavily accented English. "I'm here to help defend the French prisoners." There was a long, tense silence. I could see him evaluating me, trying to determine if this was a trap. "You're Wehrmacht?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "And you want to fight alongside us?" "Against your own people." "Against the SS," I corrected. "They're not my people anymore. If they ever were." Another pause. Then Lee lowered his pistol slightly. "This is the craziest thing I've heard all war," he said. "And I've heard some crazy things." "A welcome to May 1945, Captain," I replied. "Nothing makes sense anymore." He studied me for another moment, then made his decision. "All right, Major. Let's go see these French VIPs you're so determined to save." As we walked back to the castle together, a German major and an American captain side by side, I realized we'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, history would remember this moment, or forget it entirely. History's funny that way. Inside the castle, the scene was something out of a fever dream. American soldiers and German soldiers, standing in the same room, weapons at the ready, eyeing each other warily. The French prisoners watched this bizarre tableau with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Captain Lee had brought a small force, about 15 American soldiers, 1 Sherman tank, and a handful of liberated German Wehrmacht soldiers who'd already surrendered to him and volunteered to fight against the SS. Add my 14 men, and we had maybe 35 fighters total. Not much to defend a castle against what we knew was coming. Lee and I stood over a map of the castle and surrounding terrain, planning our defense. It was surreal. Just days ago, we would have been trying to kill each other. Now we were planning tactics together like old comrades. "The castle has thick walls," I explained, pointing at the map. "Medieval construction, stone, very solid. But there are 3 vulnerable points. The main gate, the north wall where it's lower, and the eastern tower which has structural damage." "What kind of force are we expecting?" Lee asked. "SS. Maybe a company, maybe more. They'll be well armed, fanatical. They know the war is over, which makes them more dangerous, not less. They have nothing to lose." Lee nodded grimly. "We need to buy time. Reinforcements are coming. I radioed for backup before we came up here, but it'll be hours before they arrive." "Then we hold for hours," I said simply. One of the French prisoners, Jean Borotra, the tennis player, approached us. Despite years of imprisonment, he stood straight, dignified. "Gentlemen," he said in accented English, "we prisoners wish to fight alongside you." Lee started to object, but I held up a hand. "These men have military experience," I said. "General Weygand commanded armies. General Gamelin, too. And they have every reason to fight. It's their lives on the line." Lee looked at the French officers, then nodded. "All right. But you follow orders, mine or Major Gangl's. In this castle, there's no French, no German, no American. There's only us and them. Understood?" Everyone nodded. We spent the next hour preparing. Americans and Germans worked side by side, building barricades, positioning ammunition, setting up fields of fire. My men showed the Americans the best defensive positions. Lee's men helped us set up the radio equipment. I watched a young American private, couldn't have been more than 19, laughing at something one of my corporals said. Neither spoke the other's language well, but they were using hand gestures and broken phrases, finding common ground. Soldiers' humor transcends language barriers. At one point, Lee came and stood beside me on the castle wall, Looking out over the valley, the sun was setting, painting the Alps in gold and pink. Beautiful, peaceful, a lie. "You know," Lee said quietly, "a week ago, if someone told me I'd be fighting alongside a Wehrmacht Major, I'd have said they were drunk." "A week ago," I replied, "if someone told me I'd be defending French prisoners with an American tank, I'd have had them checked for brain damage." We both smiled grimly. "Why are you doing this, Major?" Lee asked. "Really? You could have just walked away. Let someone else deal with it." I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "Captain, I've spent 5 years fighting for something I thought was honorable, defending my country, my people. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about defense and became about conquest, about cruelty, about murder dressed up as military necessity." I turned to face him. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't bring back the people who died because of orders I followed. But maybe, just maybe, I can end this war having done one thing that was unquestionably right. Saving innocent lives. Fighting alongside former enemies for a cause that actually means something." Lee nodded slowly. "Redemption. Something like that." "Well, Major," he said, extending his hand, "I'm glad you're here." I shook his hand, a German and an American, clasping hands as equals, as brothers in arms. "So am I, Captain," I said. "So am I." As darkness fell, we waited. We'd positioned the Sherman tank in the castle courtyard, where it could provide fire support. Barricades blocked the main gate. Soldiers, German and American, manned the walls. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the SS was coming. They came at dawn. We heard them before we saw them. Truck engines in the valley below, orders shouted in German. The distinctive sounds of an assault force, preparing to attack. I was on the north wall with Lee when the first shots rang out. SS infantry, emerging from the tree line, advancing in tactical formation. Professional, disciplined, deadly. "Here we go," Lee muttered, raising his carbine. "Here we go," I echoed. The battle started almost casually, a few ranging shots from both sides, testing defenses, gauging responses. Then it escalated rapidly into full combat. The SS had numbers. We estimated at least 100 to 150 men, maybe more. They had machine guns, Panzerfausts, anti-tank weapons, mortars. They had everything they needed to reduce our castle to rubble. But we had advantages too. The castle walls provided excellent cover. The Sherman tank, positioned in the courtyard, could rotate its turret to support any threatened position. And we had motivation. We knew exactly what would happen to the French prisoners if we failed. The first major assault came against the main gate. SS troops rushed forward under covering fire, trying to breach the entrance. Lee's Sherman rotated its turret and fired. The 75mm main gun sounded like the end of the world in the confined courtyard, and the high-explosive shell turned 3 SS soldiers into pink mist. My men on the walls poured rifle fire down on the attackers. I was firing alongside an American sergeant named Sutton. We'd worked out a rhythm, covering each other's reloads, calling out targets. "Left side behind the tree!" Sutton shouted. I swung my rifle, saw the SS soldier with a Panzerfaust, aimed, fired. He went down. "Got him!" Sutton confirmed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday, he and I would have been trying to kill each other. Today, we were fighting back to back, protecting each other's lives. The assault on the gate failed. The SS pulled back, leaving bodies in the open ground. But we knew this was just probing. They were testing our defenses, looking for weak points. The second assault came at the north wall. The lower section I'd identified as vulnerable. The SS threw everything at it. Machine gun fire, rifle grenades, concentrated small arms. The stone walls sparked and chipped under the impacts. General Weygand, yes, the French general, was fighting alongside us on that wall. The man was in his 70s, but he handled a rifle like he'd been born with one. He'd seen combat in the First World War, and he hadn't forgotten how. "They're trying to flank," he shouted in French, which I translated for the Americans. "Sherman, north wall, suppressive fire," Lee called into his radio. The tank's turret swung around, and its machine guns opened up, a stream of .30 caliber tracers that looked like a red rope of death stretching from the castle to the tree line. The SS assault faltered, then broke. But they weren't giving up. These were fanatics, true believers, men who'd rather die than admit defeat. And they were willing to spend lives, their own and others, to achieve their objective. The battle settled into a grinding siege. The SS couldn't break through our defenses, but we couldn't drive them off either. It became a battle of attrition. Who would run out of ammunition first? Who would make the first fatal mistake? The Sherman tank was crucial. Every time the SS tried to mass for an assault, Lee would order the tank to fire. And that 75-millimeter gun would break up their formation. But we were running low on tank ammunition. Each shell was precious. Around mid-morning, we had a crisis. The SS had managed to get a machine gun positioned in a church tower about 300 meters away. High ground with perfect line of sight into our castle courtyard. Every time anyone tried to cross the courtyard, machine gun fire forced them back. The tank couldn't elevate its main gun high enough to hit the tower. Our rifles couldn't reach that far effectively. We were pinned. That's when Jean Barotra, remember the tennis player, volunteered for something insane. "I can get out," he said, over the wall, through the forest, to the American lines. "Bring back reinforcements." Lee shook his head. "That's suicide. The SS has the castle surrounded." "Not the eastern wall," Barotra insisted. "I studied it this morning. There's a blind spot, a section of dead ground where the machine guns can't reach. If I go over there, I can make it to the forest." I looked at Lee. It was crazy, but it might work. "If anyone can do it," General Wehrmacht said, "it's John. He's the fastest man here. He's run from danger his whole career. Time to run toward help." Borotra smiled at that. Even in the middle of a battle, the French maintained their sense of humor. We created a diversion, heavy fire on the south wall to draw attention. While the SS was focused there, Borotra climbed over the eastern wall using a rope. He was wearing civilian clothes, less conspicuous than a military uniform. I watched through binoculars as he dropped to the ground outside the castle, rolled, came up running. And God, could that man run? He sprinted across the open ground like a deer, zigzagging, using every bit of cover. SS soldiers saw him, opened fire, but he was too fast, too unpredictable. Then he was into the tree line, gone. "Think he'll make it?" Sutton asked. "If he doesn't," I said, "we're all dead anyway." The battle continued. Ammunition was getting critically low. We were rationing every bullet. The Americans were down to their last few shells for the tank. My men were fixing bayonets. If the SS broke through, it would come down to hand-to-hand combat. Then disaster struck. An SS sniper, hidden somewhere in the forest, position unknown, found his mark. One of my men, Corporal Wegscheider, took a round through the shoulder. He went down hard, bleeding badly. An American medic, a kid named Thompson, immediately ran to help him. No hesitation, no concern that Wegscheider was German. He saw a wounded soldier, and he reacted. Thompson dragged Wegscheider to cover, ripped open his medical kit, and started working. I watched, moved by this simple act of humanity. A week ago, Thompson might have been the one who shot Wegscheider. Now he was saving his life. "You're going to be fine, buddy," Thompson said, even though Wegscheider didn't speak English. The tone conveyed everything. This was what we were fighting for. Not ideology, not nations, not flags, just this, one human being helping another. It was early afternoon when the SS made their final, desperate push. They'd been reinforced. We could see more troops moving into position. They were going to throw everything at us in one massive assault. If this failed, we'd survive. If it succeeded, we'd all die. Lee and I stood together on the main wall, watching them prepare. "This is it," Lee said quietly. "This is it," I agreed. We shook hands, no words needed. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, we'd fought honorably. Together. The assault came from 3 directions simultaneously, a well-coordinated attack designed to overwhelm our defenses. The main gate, the north wall, and the eastern tower all hit at once. The noise was indescribable. Machine guns, rifles, the tank firing, grenades exploding, men shouting in 3 different languages. Smoke and dust filled the air. I couldn't see more than 20 meters in any direction. I was firing, reloading, firing again, operating on pure instinct. Beside me, American and German soldiers fought side by side, indistinguishable in the chaos. We were just soldiers now, no nationalities, no politics, Just men fighting to survive. The SS reached the main gate. They were trying to blow it open with satchel charges. If they succeeded, they'd pour into the courtyard, and it would be over. I ran down from the wall, rallying defenders. The gate! Hold the gate! We poured fire through the gate's murder holes. Small openings in the medieval construction designed for exactly this purpose. The SS soldiers outside fell back, leaving their dead. But the eastern tower was in trouble. The SS had gotten close, too close, and they were trying to scale the walls. I could see hand-to-hand fighting up there. General Gamelin, of all people, using a rifle like a club, fighting with desperate fury. "We need to reinforce the tower," I shouted to Lee. "I'll take a squad," he shouted back. I was about to join him when I saw it, an SS sniper team setting up in a window across from the main gate. They had a perfect angle on the courtyard. If they opened fire, they'd cut down everyone in the open. I raised my rifle, but I was too far away for an accurate shot. I needed to get closer. I stepped out from cover onto the wall, exposing myself to get a better angle. I lined up the shot, squeezed the trigger. The sniper fell, and in that exact moment, I felt an impact like being punched in the chest, but harder, deeper. I looked down and saw blood spreading across my uniform. I'd been shot. Another sniper, one I hadn't seen. The world tilted. I staggered, grabbed at the wall for support. Everything was happening in slow motion now. I could hear shouting, Americans, Germans, French, all their voices mixing together. Someone was calling my name. I fell. The sky above was painfully blue, beautiful, endless. Lee's face appeared above me. He was yelling something, but I couldn't hear properly. Everything sounded distant, muffled. I tried to speak. The prisoners, they're safe," Lee said, and I could hear him now, his voice cutting through the fog. "The reinforcements are here." "You can hear them. The relief column is here. You did it, Major. You saved them." I could hear it now. More tank engines, lots of them. American vehicles arriving. The SS was pulling back, retreating in the face of overwhelming force. We'd won. I smiled. It seemed important to smile. "Enemies to brothers," I whispered. "Not bad for a week's work." Lee gripped my hand. "Not bad at all, Major. Not bad at all." The blue sky was fading now, turning to gray. I felt cold, but I didn't feel afraid. I'd spent 5 years of war doing terrible things, following terrible orders, fighting for terrible causes. But in the end, in the last battle of my life, I'd done something good. Something unquestionably, undeniably good. I'd fought alongside my enemy and become his brother. And that was enough. Major Josef Gangl died on the wall of Castle Itter on May 5th, 1945. He died saving French prisoners from the SS. He died fighting alongside American soldiers. He died as a hero, not for Germany, not for the Reich, but for humanity. The relief column arrived 30 minutes after he was shot. By then, the SS had already broken off the attack. They knew it was over. Some surrendered. Some fled into the mountains and were hunted down later. Some killed themselves rather than face justice. We won. The French prisoners were liberated, unharmed. Every single one of them survived. But Josef Gangl, the man who made it all possible, who risked everything, who turned against his own side to do what was right, didn't live to see it. We buried him in the local cemetery with full military honors. American soldiers and German soldiers stood together at his grave. The French prisoners were there too. Former prime ministers standing beside Wehrmacht corporals, all united in honoring a man who'd died for them. General Wehrmacht gave a eulogy. He spoke about courage, about honor, about what it means to be a soldier. He said that Josef Gangl had taught him something he thought he'd forgotten after years of imprisonment, that good men exist on all sides of every war, and that sometimes in the chaos and madness, those good men find each other. After the funeral, Paul Reynaud, former Prime Minister of France, came and spoke to me privately. "Captain Lee," he said, "I need you to remember something. The world will want to forget this battle. It's too complicated, too messy, Germans and Americans fighting together. It doesn't fit the narrative of good versus evil that people want." "But it happened," I said. "It did. And that's why you must remember it. You must tell this story, because it shows that even in the darkest times, even in war, humanity can prevail, that enemies can become brothers, that redemption is possible." I promised him I would remember. I promised them all. The Battle of Castle Itter was the only time in World War II that American and German forces fought as allies. It was also one of the last battles of the war in Europe. Hitler had been dead for 5 days. Germany would surrender 3 days later, on May 8th. In the grand scheme of the war, Castle Itter was a footnote, a tiny skirmish involving maybe 200 soldiers total. But to the people who were there, it was everything. Jean Borotra, the tennis player who escaped over the wall, made it to American lines and led the relief column back to the castle. He survived the war and lived until 1994, always speaking about the extraordinary courage of Josef Gangl and the Americans who fought to save them. General Wehrmacht testified about Gangl's heroism at post-war tribunals. He made sure the world knew that not all German officers were Nazis, that some had risked everything to do what was right. The French prisoners lobbied for Josef Gangl to be recognized as a hero. The town of Würgl, Austria, named a street after him, Major Josef Gangl Strasse. There's a memorial there now honoring the German officer who died fighting against the SS. Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Castle Itter. He always said he didn't deserve it, that the real hero was Gangl, the man who risked everything, with no guarantee of victory or recognition. But here's what haunts me about this story: how few people know about it. The Battle of Castle Itter doesn't fit our comfortable narratives about World War II. We like our history simple: Allies good, Axis bad. We want clear heroes and villains, not complicated men making difficult choices in impossible situations. Josef Gangl was a Wehrmacht officer. By definition, he was on the wrong side of history. He fought for Germany for 5 years. He followed orders. He participated in a war of aggression and conquest. But in the end, when it mattered most, he chose humanity over ideology. He chose honor over obedience. He chose to save innocent lives, even though it meant betraying everything he'd been taught to believe. Does that redeem him? I don't know. I'm not qualified to judge. Maybe redemption isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about choosing who you want to be in the present, even when that choice costs everything. What I do know is this: on May 5th, 1945, Germans and Americans stopped being enemies and became brothers. Not because the war was over. It wasn't. Not officially. Not because someone ordered them to. No order could have created that bond. But because they recognized in each other something more fundamental than nationality or politics. They saw fellow soldiers fighting for a cause worth dying for: the protection of innocent life. That's a lesson worth remembering. In 1945, in 2025, forever. There's a saying in German: Ehre wem Ehre gebührt. Honor to whom honor is due. Josef Gangl earned his honor on the walls of Castle Itter. So did Jack Lee and his American soldiers. So did the French prisoners who fought for their own freedom. So did the German soldiers who chose conscience over obedience. They all earned their place in history. The tragedy is that history barely remembers them. But we can change that. We can tell their story. We can remember the day when enemies became brothers, when a German officer and an American captain stood side by side, when soldiers from 3 nations fought together against evil. We can remember that even in the darkest times, humanity can shine through. We can remember Castle Itter. Major Josef Gangl died on May 5th, 1945. But his example, his courage, his redemption, his sacrifice lives on. And maybe, just maybe, if we remember his story, we'll learn something about ourselves, about the choices we make, about what it means to be human. Because in the end, that's what this story is about. Not Germans or Americans or French. Not politics or ideology or nationalism. Just humans. Making impossible choices in impossible times. And choosing against all odds to be better. That's the legacy of Castle Itter. That's the story that must never be forgotten.